Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I want to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Folks, Christian DeTalk with the Daily Caller published a piece regarding statements Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the current chairwoman of the DNC, made during a CNN interview. Wasserman Schultz was attempting to say that the difference between Democrat candidates and Republican candidates is that Republican candidates are trying to outright wing each other. She went on to put words in their mouths, saying that GOP candidates have said, "Yeah, let's kick women. Let's kick them and immigrants out of the country." Of course, I can think of no Republican candidate who actually stated this. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was being completely intellectually disingenuous, but that's nothing new when it comes to the campaign rhetoric of the DNC. This all ties back into what I have said on previous shows, that the radical and extremist left wing in this country play games of semantics. They never let facts get in the way of their twisted agenda. Debbie Wasserman Schultz lied in that interview. She has intentionally mischaracterized what Republicans have said in order to push her extremist agenda. But the truth of the matter is, no Republican candidates for the office of President of the United States has stated any such thing. You also have to remember that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the same woman who failed to distinguish or differentiate Democrats from socialists. Of course, the reason for that is because there is no difference between the Democrat Party of today and socialism. That is exactly what they are espousing. Furthermore, Wasserman Schultz dodged questions on Sunday, October 11th, about whether Democrat candidate, independent Bernie Sanders' self-description as a socialist would hurt the party. Folks, I can think of no clearer an example of the Democrats trying to hide their true character from the American people. They are afraid that if the American people see them for who they truly are, then the people will reject them outright. I believe the vast majority of the American populace is tired of redistributive programs and schemes. After all, Obamacare is a redistributive program, and it has failed. The Democrats clearly realize this, and that is why they have created the false narrative of the war on women and the war on minorities. Everything about their campaign tactics is founded upon divide and conquer. It is for that reason that the national character and identity of the American people has come under a constant and relentless attack. Since they can't win in the marketplace of ideas, Democrats always turn to emotionally charged arguments designed to obfuscate the real issues and problems facing the country. That is also the reason why none of their policies work. Ultimately, the Democrats' strategy is to tear apart the country and its constitutional republic to replace it with a utopian socialist nightmare.
Well, it seems that, not only are they trying to hide this behind this facade, but in a way with creating the false narrative, they're actually looking at laying it right out in the open for everybody to see. But because of things like political correctness, complacency, emotionally charged arguments, they realized, and they're utilizing that old cliche, the best place to hide something is right under people's noses. They're actually being right out and open and honest with it, and those of us who understand and see that they are the lingering remnants of the Fabian Society, socialism, communism, Marxism, whatever ism you want to have, the more these emotionally charged arguments come about, it's almost like they're using these arguments as a form of entrapment. They can't defeat the people, like you said, in the market of ideas, so they'll entrap them. They do it purposefully to get somebody to say something, and then they can completely take it right out of context, edit it and omit what doesn't fit to their agenda, string it together, and then put it out for the world to see. This is how they operate. This is how propagandists operate. And W. Wasserman Schultz is no different than Hans Göring, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, in a sense of the ideology and the use of this tactic.
Yeah, she absolutely isn't any different than they were. And it all comes down to trying to make their vision look better for the country. And, they say that silence can say just as much about what someone is thinking as stating any words. Her omission or her refusal to even address the question of whether Bernie Sanders' statements as self-describing him as a socialist would hurt the party speaks volumes. It shows what we have been saying all along, that they have fully embraced the Fabian Society's doctrine of socialism, this utopian socialist ideal that is poisoning the country with these radical new left doctrines, such as the doctrine of political correctness, such as the radical anti-gun initiative that they've been pushing, and everything else. And you realize that whenever they say that something is common sense, or they propose legislation that is supposedly common sense, you can rest assured that what they are proposing is diametrically opposed and contrary to the United States Constitution. And that, once again, is one of the primary reasons why we put these shows together. We want to demonstrate what is threatening your constitutional rights, as well as letting you know what your constitutional rights are. As you have said, no one can ever fully know the Constitution. It is one of those things that you learn more about it each and every time you delve into it. This is why we think that having open and honest conversations regarding the Constitution is so important, because it allows everyone to expand their understanding of the Constitution. And as we have always said here on the Wright Flyer, that is one of the most important things that an American citizen can possess, a working and fluent knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution. Now, meanwhile, the Man March paraded through Washington, D.C., chanting for the destruction of the United States. Louis Farrakhan crowed that America is under divine judgment and that it will be punished with ever greater calamities. Old Calypso Louis ought to take a look in the mirror, because that is the real face of calamity. He is spewing the rhetoric of hate because he absolutely loathes and despises everything America represents. In all honesty, Louis Farrakhan is the true face of the radical left-wing agenda in this country. This is what the false prophets of tolerance really look like. The radical statements of Louis Farrakhan is but a consequence of the poison of the doctrine of political correctness. In years past, this sort of rhetoric would have never been tolerated. The American people would have joined together in a show of unity and solidarity to outright condemn these sorts of statements. However, the mainstream media is marching lockstep with the Man March. Folks, there is no denying that this is a central part of the agenda that they are attempting to thrust down each and every one of our throats. It is also a reflection of why Jeremy and I go to such lengths to try and spread the message of the United States Constitution. These people, espousing their radical agenda, are attempting to deprive you of your fundamental unalienable rights and liberties. It is more important now than ever to possess a working and fluent knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution. Without it, these nefarious forces of tyranny and despotism might actually win in their crusade against common decency and liberty. What's amazing about all of this is the fact that these radical elements feel so comfortable right now that they are willing to take the veneer off of their charade and display their true ugly colors, as Jeremy had mentioned earlier. Venom drips from every word they speak in front of the microphones as they attempt to denigrate and besmirch every decent, hard-working American citizen. Well, enough is enough. We are all tired of this nonsensical rhetoric and are willing to defend our God-given rights. There can be no denial that these people have avowed themselves as enemies of the United States. They loathe the freedoms and liberties possessed by every American and seek to ensnare us in the bondage of governmental servitude. Yet the United States Constitution clearly defines that the people are the supreme sovereigns of the land, and that the government is meant to be their servant, not the other way around. Again, this is why it is imperative that we all possess a fluent and working knowledge of our shared Constitution.
Well, with things like Louis Farrakhan, the rhetoric he speaks, the things that he does, the attention that he garners is much akin, and we have to look back at history once again. If we were in the times of Nazi Germany and we were there, Randy, you and I both know that the Wright Flyer would not exist. Because of our understanding of what natural law is, God-given rights that are unalienable, this would be completely polar opposite of what was espoused in Nazi Germany. With the ties that Louis Farrakhan has, the entities that he represents, this ill-gotten, bastardized form of so-called tolerance, and what he projects is nothing more than what the lackeys of Adolf Hitler did. And that's what he truly is. He's a lackey of socialists. We can look at it, and times have changed fundamentally in this country to where history is repeating itself over and over. And we don't even have to just look at Nazi Germany. You can look at any scenario in history where it was akin to this. You have a dictatorship and you have lackeys, and it's all put out there, and the people are the ones that ultimately suffer. Why? Because if they refused, they were struck down, or if they capitulated to that what was going on, ultimately they lived in an impoverished sense of being without having their freedoms and liberties. That's what's happening here in the United States. It's really frightening to see that this country go the path that it has. In our short lifespan on this earth, Randy, I don't think I have ever thought that my country would ever become this way. I could see it growing up, and I'm sure you could too, ever changing, but we clung on to that essence of the United States could never get this bad. And folks, I was right in that thinking, but at the same time I was proven wrong, because it has gotten that bad. And there's only one way to come back from that, and that is to have the wherewithal to understand what is at stake, what people are freely giving up. They're willfully giving up the very essence that establishes and identifies them as a free individual. And they're doing this for what? Because it sounds good to them. It's not really disrupting their lives. So long as they capitulate, it's not disrupting their lives in the sense of bread and circuses. They're fat, happy, they're entertained, they have the things going on in their lives that they've always wanted, except none of that matters if they don't eventually have the ability to maintain and keep the freedom that comes with that. So it's the whole thing in this mindset has come about because it's just like what Adolf Hitler said before. If you tell a lie often enough and you repeat it often enough, eventually it becomes the truth. That's a very scary and frightening thing for this country, especially considering what the premise and foundation that our country was built upon.
Yes, it absolutely is. And part of this type of complacency that you're speaking of developed in the immediate aftermath of World War II. The greatest generation, and they really were great, risked everything. We lost countless numbers of hard-working men and even women during the Second World War. And they sacrificed so much to ensure that this great evil of National Socialism was defeated, as well as the sort of National Socialism that was occurring in the Empire of Japan. And there was a time there from late 1941 through 1943 where we really wondered whether we were going to win. We had suffered setback after setback, and because the American government had mobilized in such a radical fashion, and I say that because every aspect of society was geared towards winning that war, it was thought that surely we were the forces of good, because it was clear to see the delineations in that war between right and wrong, good and evil. So therefore, our government must be benevolent and would never turn on us. And that sort of mentality even survived through the radical countercultural revolution of the 1960s and 70s, which really started to increase this rapid pace towards utopian socialism like it is plaguing us today. But it goes back to this false sense of security that we had developed because we had taken the step to defeat not one, but two of the worst tyrannical and despotic regimes the world had ever known. But what we hadn't realized, because the government hadn't explained it to the people and had hid parts of it and said that the Russians were fighting for the same thing we were allied with a tyrannical and despotic regime that was just as bad, if not worse, than the enemy that we were fighting in Europe, and yes, the enemy that we were fighting in Japan. The gulags in Russia were horrific. The purges that Stalin implemented were horrific, and the 5-year policies that he had implemented before the start of the war had really created an artificial famine that was totally man-made because of the radical ideals that Joseph Stalin was trying to push with his stupid Marxist policies. And yes, I use the word stupid for a reason, because it was stupid, it was boneheaded, it inflicted harm upon the people just because they had to adhere to a radical ideology. And we see remnants of that and reflections of that in this current administration. This notion that we have to push gun control even though it was a gun-free zone that created the problem. The president is purposefully being obtuse with respect to that issue, and it's only going to result in matters getting worse. In fact, according to the Los Angeles branch of the AFP, President Obama has come out and weighed in on the GOP election for Speaker of the House. He claimed that this represents that all of the GOP has gone off the deep end. It's this kind of political projection that I'm tired of with respect to this president. If anyone is radical, it is he, for the reasons that I've just mentioned. But also, take for instance his attempt again to push firearms regulations through executive orders and actions to go around the Constitution and the supreme law of the land, in the wake of this unspeakable tragedy that unfolded at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. Again, instead of looking at the facts in an objective and reasonable fashion, the president has stuck to his guns, pun intended, to push for radical gun control measures. The president interjects himself in areas where it is totally inappropriate to do so. But he does this because he is driven by that same sort of radical agenda that we saw with Joseph Stalin, and this agenda dominates his mind at every waking moment. President Obama is obsessed with spreading socialism and destroying the United States Constitution. How else could one explain his determination to use executive orders in an illicit fashion to deprive law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and unalienable rights to keep and bear firearms? The president further lied during this press conference, stating that the facts and evidence are on their side. Nothing could be further from the truth. Radical left-wing extremists in the United States of America disregard the truth and ignore facts all the time. Every one of their pet projects is built upon emotionalism, all designed to push redistributive programs upon the American public. Yet, history has always shown that such utopian socialist policies fail. Once again, the president is completely unable to divorce himself from this radical ideology. This is why I have often said that the Democrats are incapable of projecting a clear ideology based on rational thinking, which is designed for the betterment of America and her people. Their entire philosophy requires that the people suffer. Socialism is built upon the equal suffering of everyone who is not a part of the ruling political elite, and that is the very reason why I call socialism neo-feudalism. This is what the president meant when he said that he desired to fundamentally transform the United States of America. And I'll take that one step further. That was also the reason why Michelle Obama said that she was proud for the first time in her life of her country when they put him in, because she knew that she could get carte blanche to ruin everything that is great about the United States.
I don't know if anybody remembers something else that Obama had said. You know, it was either before or after. I can't remember. It was either before or after the comment about him fundamentally changing the United States. But he also made the comment that we live in the greatest country on the planet. Won't you help me in changing it? Now, that very statement right there should be a red flag, an eye-opening reality check for every United States citizen. We live in the greatest country on the planet. We have the longest contiguous document called the United States Constitution that has ever been in existence in the history of the world. Recorded history. Randy has mentioned that before. I've mentioned it before. That very statement, if we live in the greatest country, which we do, why would we want to change it? Why would somebody give up something so great and change it? It's like that old saying goes, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We don't need to fix anything that pertains to the Constitution in the grand scheme of things. What they want to change isn't what things that should be addressed or are not addressed, but ultimately will be. No, they want to change those things. The greatness of the United States Constitution, the greatest thing about it is our unalienable rights. They want to fundamentally transform this country by changing the greatest document ever put on paper by the hands of man. That should be a reality check, again, for everybody. If you have something, which you do, the United States Constitution, let's say you have one of the greatest working vehicles. It's, for all intents and purposes, the best vehicle in every aspect that you could possibly drive. Are you going to take it to an auto mechanic or a body shop and have it altered or modified, in the chance of those alterations or modifications possibly taking away and diminishing the greatness of that vehicle, the working applications of that vehicle? Of course not. That would be lunacy. It just does not bode well for doing that. You have something, it's the longest contiguous document of its kind. It's what makes our country great. And it's not just that, but it's also the citizens who understand it and have a working knowledge of it. That is the backbone of maintaining a free nation from tyranny, from a dictatorship, and from an evil regime, no matter who may be in office or what office they may hold. It is the failsafe. It is the wall that they cannot seem to get over. And since they can't get over it, they want to try and punch through it. Walls are only as strong as the foundations that they're laid on. They chip away at the foundation, which is what they're doing now. Eventually that wall will come down, if we allow it to come down.
That's right. We have to be proactive in the maintenance of our rights. And the comments that you were speaking of, Jeremy, I believe Obama made on what was famously lampooned on the right as the apology tour during his first term in office. He had basically gone around the world and said, yeah, America is great, but there's so much more wrong with America that America's not actually great, and that we should change it, because America needs to reflect the rest of the world. But that's part of the problem. Our founding fathers and our forefathers all came to this country in those early days to escape the rest of the world, to escape the kind of tyranny that monarchies provide, whether they be absolutist or constitutional monarchies. They were trying to escape to escape the sort of tyranny and despotism that would punish somebody for not following or adhering to a state religion. They were trying to escape laws that were detrimental and harmful to them. And that is why the American Revolution was such an important evolutionary step in the history of the world. It was the first time that a government was created with this idea that the government should be based on the consent of the governed. Now, that notion is old, dates back to the 1200s with the signing of Magna Carta. But in England it was very slow to evolve, and even to this day is not as strong as our adherence to that notion in the United States. The main difference being that the United States government is entirely built upon that foundation. But this current regime, and even the detente or establishment wing of the GOP, are working nonstop and tirelessly to corrode, corrupt, and undermine that foundation to cause the wall to collapse from within. And it really is shocking when you stop and think about it, just how far they have been able to go in such a short time span. It hasn't been a decade yet. But Obama has pushed us to the edge, and not just Obama, it's been every branch of government. It has been the feckless representatives in the House of Representatives and senators in the Senate and governors and state governments and all of these sanctuary cities or anti-gun states or any of these media pundits or professors that run out and try and belittle those aspects of our country that are great, that have made us go this far. And of course, to a certain degree, it is also based on the complacency of the American people. And I don't say that with an attempt to put down the American people. I love excuse me, I love this country. I love everything about our people. But I have to point out where we have gone wrong, and that is by allowing these things to slowly seep in over the years. And this has been building up since the 20th century. In fact, even the early part of the 20th century. People often forget that it was Theodore Roosevelt and the Republican Party that gave birth to the progressive movement. And Theodore Roosevelt went out when he created the Sherman Antitrust Act with the direct desire, intent, and purpose to strip away power from the people in order to give it to the government. He didn't like the fact that the private citizen was stronger than the United States government. And that was totally and completely contrary to the tenets of federalism, the natural law principles, and the government philosophy and principles of the United States Constitution. We've stated that many times on this show, but if you're trying to look at where these problems started, it really, could be centered on that point in time when Theodore Roosevelt expanded the power of the federal government exponentially. Then it followed with another wave of power grabs by the federal government under Woodrow Wilson. During World War I, Woodrow Wilson even called his policies wartime socialism. And he had made it to where if you spoke out against the government, again, it was like a second Alien Sedition Act. The first one being back during the Adams administration, and then this one under Woodrow Wilson greatly expanded the power of the federal government. They could come in and censor newspapers. They could come in and take away property and claim that there was no need for just compensation because it was during a time of war. But that is not what the United States Constitution says in its four corners. And again, this is why it is so important to know your constitutional rights. Even if you don't know the history of what happened, we provide that just to fully explain why things like your Fifth Amendment protection against unlawful takings is so important. And you have to know this, because if you don't, then the government can hoodwink you. They can stand there and say, see, look, you don't know your rights, therefore we can deprive you of every right you have because we know better than you. And that's literally what it comes down to. That is absolutely what they believe. They think they are smarter and better than we are.
Well, and because of thinking like that, and people actually allowing themselves to fall into that trap, this is why we have gun-free zones. Now, I had an idea, and I spoke to our friend Nelson, our first air marshal, yesterday about this. And I told him, I have an idea, and this is what I would like to see. Every place in the United States to where open carry or concealed carry is permitted, I would like to see every single place put up a placard or a sign that says, no victim zone, as a contrary to the gun-free zones, because that would tell criminals, if they were smart enough to comprehend it, that in no uncertain terms, the people in that establishment, whether it's a church, a public venue, restaurant, place of business, or even a college campus or elementary school, that there will be no victims there. There will be no victims at the hands of some sociopath who wants to make a name for himself after spending 3 or 4 hours in his parents' basement writing some deluded diatribe that they refer to as a manifesto. I think if we were to see that, it may start to change the mindset of the American people yet again, but shift it into the direction of being proactive. Let the criminals know. Let them know. Make them wonder if they come into an establishment that has a no victim zone placard. Let them wonder just who there is armed. The ones that they can't see with the firearm, who may be carrying concealed, or even the ones that they can see openly carrying. This harkens back to what Benjamin Franklin said: an armed society is a polite society. They want to institute all these gun-free zones, thinking with this horrible and dumbfounded mindset that criminals actually care about that. They're thinking that they actually care that if they see a sign that says no gun zone, gun-free zone, criminals aren't going to care about that. That's why they go to those gun-free zones and carry out their dastardly deeds, because they know that there's no guns there. They know that it will become a victim zone. I say we put those placards up that say no victim zone or victim free zone, and let them wonder, let them think, let them rethink their actions.
There's actually I can't remember if it's a middle school or high school here in Texas that has a sign out, and it says, "Warning, our teachers and staff are armed. If you come on to these premises and attempt to, create violence, you will be shot." And that was the first step of what you were talking about. And you're absolutely right. An armed society is a polite society, because the criminals always gravitate to soft targets. So when you put up a sign that says this site is a gun-free zone, you are openly inviting the sociopaths to march in there and to act upon their insane machinations, because they are driven by this desire to justify their existence. That's the commonality between a Dylan Stormroof, a Vester Flanagan, or that moron that went and shot up Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. And the politicians always resort back to blaming the gun instead of looking at the commonality. Why are these idiots attempting to justify their existence by attacking everyone else? Why are they seeking to address their problems by harming others? It's because of the greed that government creates, this entitlement mentality that a socialist welfare state creates. And there is no escaping that. But will you hear Obama say that? Or will you hear the mainstream media address that? Of course not, because it doesn't fit their agenda, and they follow that same type of propaganda mindset that was developed by Joseph Goebbels in Nazi Germany. People forget that Joseph Goebbels had a PhD. He had examined the way people think, and he had developed this process in order to ensure that the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, would secure power in Germany. It took a while, but they managed to secure it, and they pushed the most radical socialist agenda that Western Europe had ever seen. Certainly not the most radical socialist agenda all of Europe had seen, because that was currently in place at that time in Soviet Russia. And these types of systems that are built on these potentates that strip the people's ability to keep and bear arms so that they cannot resist the radical agendas of those regimes could happen anywhere in the world, anywhere where complacency sets in. Please, please don't ever think that it can't happen here, because it can. It can happen anywhere. The people of Germany, during the Weimar era, thought it was impossible for the Nazis to gain power. Yet they did. It was just like how the Republican Party, under William McKinley, they didn't want Theodore Roosevelt to become president because they didn't like his kind of socialist and progressive tactics. There was a time when the Republican Party actually was more conservative, even before progressivism started. It was that kind of line of thinking that gave us a great conservative mind, like Calvin Coolidge. But they put Theodore Roosevelt in the vice presidency, thinking that that would prevent him from becoming president. And then, lo and behold, in 1900, William McKinley was assassinated, and Theodore Roosevelt took the reins of power and was able to push forward the first rapid expansion of the federal government since the time of the Civil War. Now, Jeremy, I'm glad you brought up the discussion about these signs that say victim-free zone, because I'm going to tell you what your opponents are going to look like. Folks, this next story comes out of my home state of Texas. Students at the University of Texas at Austin are planning to carry dildos in response to the campus carry law that was passed earlier this year. This is the sort of insanity that allows things like gun-free zones to be implemented, placing the lives of all students at risk. However, the students have been so brainwashed that they are incapable of discerning the facts. Clearly, they have bought into the utopian socialist lie that gun-free zones keep people safe. How does proclaiming a place to be a gun-free zone prevent violence from occurring? The answer is that it simply does not. What this also reflects is that the current generation has been perverted. Everything they do centralizes around sex. It is this current young generation that supports same-sex marriage wholeheartedly. Moreover, it is this young generation that believes in the doctrine of moral relativism. I have only been separated from college by a decade, and I can honestly say that I can't recall a time when we supported such odd behaviors. Sex toys have nothing to do with our unalienable and fundamental right to keep and bear arms. Apparently, the students at the University of Texas at Austin are incapable of discerning the truth and connecting the dots. They are attempting to lampoon the unalienable rights of the American citizenry. It is truly disgusting. According to a public Facebook group page, the students are planning to carry the sex toys on campus on August 24th, 2016, which happens to be the first day of classes for the next fall semester. The students claim they are angry about the Texas legislature allowing people to carry so-called deadly concealed weapons on campus, while at the same time denying people the right to freely express their sexuality. I never realized that the college campus was a place to freely express one's sexuality. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but I always thought that a college campus was a place to engage in higher education. Apparently today, higher education is all about freely expressing sexual deviance. What has happened to common sense in America? How did we ever fall to a position where students are more concerned about sexual deviance over their own well-being? It is a poor reflection upon the public education system in the United States. We are in the grips of a nefarious attempt to strip away the moral compass of the American people, thereby making it easier to strip away the United States Constitution and our fundamental, unalienable rights. This is all deeply concerning.
You know what has actually happened with this, Randy? With these sycophants, these people that think they're high and mighty, and them carrying sex toys actually has some correlation, and they're doing it in protest. These same types of individuals are the ones that brought about all of this hoopla about this, sexual violence on campus. Students against sexual violence. Now, I'm absolutely against such sexual violence. I find that rape is one of the most detestable acts that could ever be perpetrated against another human being. However, these same individuals took that and ran with it, and now what they're doing is coming back full circle again. What this is going to do, the same things they railed against, they're laying the groundwork for it to happen. They are inciting this to happen on this campus. And it may happen. Pray to God it doesn't happen, but if it does, they will be the individuals to blame. Also, they will be the individuals to blame if it should try to take place and somebody was capable of stopping them by utilizing a firearm to protect the innocent individual. And if their protest works and they get it stricken down to where they can't, carry on campus, so on and so forth, and acts of rape and sexual violence take place, they're the ones who have to carry the burden for that. Because an individual in this country has the right, the legal right, to utilize deadly force to protect another individual in cases of great bodily harm or sexual assault. If these individuals carrying these sex toys want to perpetrate this because they think firearms are instruments of death, they really should no longer continue their education at any school, at any college, because apparently they're not learning anything. They're not of the intellectual capacity to comprehend that it is not inanimate objects like firearms that cause death. However, it is inanimate objects like sex toys being paraded around campus that will actually convince people and provoke people to act in such a way as to perpetrate any kind of sexual violent crime against another individual there on campus. I can see this whole thing unraveling now, and again, it's come full circle in a very short time. It wasn't that long ago with the I believe it was the Duke lacrosse team that were charged with rape and lewd and lascivious behavior, so on and so forth. They speak out against all this stuff happening, but yet they want to. It's a smoke and mirrors type thing. You know, this again is extreme propaganda being used. Pay no attention to what we're saying, because what we're saying is we don't want people to be left untouched. We don't want people to remain in the sense of not being a victim. No, they only want certain victims. So because the victims that they create through their propaganda, they will utilize again to institute more propaganda on a grander scale, and increasing it exponentially every single time they create these situations.
And you know, they play up the tragedies that happen with these smaller numbers because it was Joseph Stalin who said that when there are a great number of people killed, it's a statistic, but when it's an individual, it's a tragedy. And that's because you can put a face to it. And that is why President Obama went out to Roseburg, Oregon, to try and politicize this issue and this horrific tragedy that happened at Umpqua Community College. And it's totally disrespectful to the memory of those 9 innocent souls whose lives were taken. But in the case of these University of Texas students, it gets even worse. The Facebook event page makes the false equivalency that carrying the sex toys on campus would be about as effective in protecting the students from outright violence as allowing carry-conceal license holders to carry on campus. How could these fools actually make such a false equivalency? A dildo will not prevent someone hell-bent on taking your life from doing so. A firearm is the most effective form of self-defense that a citizen possesses. It is for that very reason that our founding fathers saw fit to include the Second Amendment within the Bill of Rights. The security of a free state must be secured by the people. That is exactly what the Second Amendment means. And that's also what it means by the militia. It's not just for military purposes, it is also for keeping the peace, securing the stability and freedom of a free state. That is the only way you can do it. It has to rest with the people if we are to remain a free and sovereign country. And, as we have said before, sovereignty rests solely in the hands of the American people. Perhaps the University of Texas and its students would be better served if they spent more time learning about the United States Constitution than attempting to equate the right to keep and bear firearms to the right of making fools of themselves by carrying sex toys on campus. Is it any wonder, then, looking at these students and their stupidity, that America's standing in education has slipped to an abysmal low? I think not. The event page went on to state that the sex toys were much safer for recreational play than firearms. Of course, that too is a false equivalency, and it is a non sequitur. Firearms, when one has learned to use them properly, are a great source of entertainment and fun, and even relaxation. Going to the shooting range is one of the best activities that a person can do. Of course, that is my personal opinion. What's more, sex toys are not necessarily a safe form of recreational play. Sexually transmitted diseases are a constant problem. Again, these students don't want to take responsibility for their own actions. There is little doubt in my mind that these are the same students who want every American to pay for their own sexual deviance. They remind me of Sandra Fluke, who went before Congress demanding that American citizens help pay for her birth control. Apparently, by Sunday afternoon on October 11th of 2015, over 1,700 attendees had signed up for the event. These students clearly lack common sense. They parade around with sex toys, thinking that this will somehow make a meaningful statement. In truth, all they have managed to accomplish is making themselves look like deviants and fools. Their parents must be really proud of them. I know my parents would have been ashamed if I ever participated in such a stupid activity.
Well, Randy, I firmly believe, I can't stress that enough, I firmly believe that this is nothing more than the situation of the tail wagging the dong. I mean, the tail wagging the dog. This whole thing, again, it's being utilized and trumped up as propaganda. People don't understand that that's exactly what it is. Many people would actually think, oh, well, this is cute. You know, what a creative way of protesting. You get the people's attention. Well, that's one of the tenets of the principles of propaganda. In order for propaganda to be effective, it has to be achieved by utilizing an attention-getting medium. This is what they're doing. They again, their stupidity levels are so high, and I'm really not liking to use the word stupid. These individuals are not smart enough to be stupid. They're jumping on this bandwagon or wagon and are running rampant with this because it's the thing to do. It's peer pressure exemplified in such a disastrous way that it's going to be the downfall. Things like this will be the downfall, in fact, are the downfall of societies. I can't remember who it was that said this, but, and I know it was some dictator, potentate that said this, that the true way to bring down the United States and the freedom that it entails is to infect the United States with pornography, alcohol, and drugs. That will be the downfall of the United States. This is one of those shining moments of that adage, of that individual speaking this. All they're doing is proving that individual to be correct.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm going to make your blood boil even more, because I'm going to actually quote what this person said. But first, let me introduce you to who organized the event. The event was organized by a University of Texas alum named Jessica Jin. Jin, who is 24 years old, claimed that she chose the sex toy theme to equate it to the, quote, masturbatory nature of the power which people derive from gun ownership and the self-aggrandizing, I'm one of the good ones, I'll protect you, arguments we're so often expected to simply trust, close quote. Jen is clearly off her rockers, folks. She thinks it's better to trust a government to protect us than by utilizing our unalienable fundamental right to keep and bear arms. She has promoted the event on social media with the hashtag, quote, hashtag Cox not Glocks, close quote. I'm guessing that Miss Jen struggles with reading comprehension and has never read the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Otherwise, she wouldn't spew her worthless drivel. Jin further said that, quote, if our country continues in the direction it's headed, everyone will eventually have to carry in order to protect any semblance of freedom or equality, close quote. Well, Miss Jin, if everyone carried, or more people were allowed to carry, then the deviants that we see who carry out these mass shootings wouldn't act out on campus, or if they did, they'd be stopped before creating mass carnage. She mentions that we don't trust each other, and that the mistrust is perpetrating a, quote, self-defeating escalation of gun ownership in America, close quote. She equated that living in a fully armed society resembles something more like a, quote, fear-based hellhole, close quote, than the land of the free. Again, she obviously has no understanding of the way despotism works. In every dictatorship that has ever plagued this world, the first thing that the dictators sought to confiscate is either the weapons of the citizens, or in more modern times, the firearms from the private citizens. Obviously, Ms. Jin fails to recognize the danger of stripping decent, hard-working, law-abiding citizens of their fundamental right to keep and bear arms. Now, this is followed by another deviant at the University of Texas, Daniel S. Hammermesh. Hammermesh sounds communist. A professor of economics at the University of Texas has vowed to quit his job before the law goes into effect. Professor, actually, let me applaud you. Please hurry and pack your bags. The sooner you quit your job, the sooner the students at your establishment will be better served.
You know, I have a feeling that that is probably the smartest and most intellectual thing that that professor has ever said. You know, it amazes me that these individuals, they put out this line, you know, these professors, well, my job is to educate you, my job is to do this. No, what it boils down to, for the vast majority, is they don't want to educate people, they want to re-educate people. They want to indoctrinate individuals. Individuals like Miss Jin. Now, it's funny that this would actually coincide with me exercising my Second Amendment right. I just picked up a new member of my family. The adoption was completed this past Friday. I purchased a firearm, another handgun, of course, and I have this quirky little thing to where I like to name my firearms. Now, people would say, "Oh, well, that's just, you know, that's weird." No, not really. It's all done in good fun. Now, with coming up with the name of this, Randy actually suggested that I name it Antigen. Now, it's funny because the word antigen, and it's actually a play on words. Antigen is foreign substance that causes the body to produce antibodies. Now, in other words, this foreign substance, well, it could be any foreign substance, you know, antimony, tin, lead, maybe, that creates something to, you know, combat other foreign substances that would ail an individual. Let's think about that for a moment, folks. I think I found the name to my newly acquired family member. It's one of these glorious things that everybody should be able to to exercise and acquire. Because, see, the point of this is owning firearms, exercising your rights. It gives you the measures of being able to fully understand and comprehend what they are for. Okay? With social deviants like Miss Jin and that professor who I'm hoping, as Randy does, that he cannot quit his job fast enough. Those are the individuals that are threatening the security of our country. They're the individuals that are threatening our rights, and in no uncertain terms, eventually get more extravagant, more radical, more extreme, and ultimately become the enemies of the United States. It's because of that thought process that has been implanted in their head, and the taproot of emotional ignorance. These individuals, they want to talk about, oh, freedom this, freedom that, blah, blah, blah. They don't know the first thing about freedom. Many people don't. They don't know the first thing about responsibility. Understanding and knowing and utilizing and having a working knowledge of your unalienable rights, that is where your freedom comes from. It's not free. Freedom is never free, because you have to expend the time, the energy to understand it, and have the willingness to be held accountable for exercising of your rights. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Miss Jin is not capable of that understanding. My guess is that her intellectual capacity regarding this matter is equivalent to the ovulation cycle of a gnat.
Well, I wouldn't want to insult gnats, but, now we turn to a story out of Jeremy's home state of Michigan. According to Dave Urbanski with The Blaze, protesters gathered at a Michigan Global Rally for Humanity on Saturday, October 10th, in a multi-city event targeting radical Islam. These brave Michiganders also carried firearms to the event, exercising their Second Amendment right to keep and bear firearms. Maybe the students from the University of Texas should take a lesson from these brave American citizens who actually care for the safety and well-being of their fellow Americans and the American people in general. Now, to be fair, there were a great many pro-Second Amendment supporters who counter-protested an anti-gun demonstration on the University of Texas at Austin campus on October 1st. Nevertheless, the mainstream media focuses on the deviant and lunatic fringe who want to strip us of our right to keep and bear arms. Jeremy, this reminds me of the time you joined a group of decent Americans standing outside of the recruitment centers for the military earlier this summer. That was in the wake of the Islamo-fascists who killed American servicemen at recruitment centers in Tennessee. Again, this was at a gun-free zone, which unnecessarily placed innocent lives at risk. This is what I don't understand about people like Ms. Jin. How can these people fail to see that gun-free zones are the problem, not the right of the people to keep and bear arms? It's madness. America needs more people to act like these brave Michigan citizens who are willing to stand up for our rights. It's that sort of display that rekindles all of our faith in this great republic of ours. I honestly believe that people are starting to wake up to the truth. What's more, I'm confident that the media and the political elite are horrified by this prospect. They have been attacking us, lampooning us, and smearing our good reputations for far too long. The good folks in Michigan truly understand the dangers that are facing our country right now. It's too bad that morons like Ms. Jin seem either unable, or more likely, unwilling, to open their eyes to the truth. Yet the truth is, The forces of radical Islam present a real threat and danger to the United States. Radical Islam orchestrated the worst terrorist attack on American soil. It was a Muslim who shot the service members at Fort Hood, and it was a Muslim who shot our recruiters in Tennessee during this last summer. Louis Farrakhan is a Muslim, and he has been crowing for increased calamities to befall the United States. Ms. Jen, if you want to protest something, why don't you protest those who would stop at nothing to kill you, rather than attempting to deprive us of our unalienable rights? I think it's because you don't care about the American people. Be honest, Jen. Is that what it is?
Well, I think what it is she's actually embarrassed by the notion that individuals such as yourself and myself and many other people who understand the magnitude of the Second Amendment, and the embarrassment comes in where she knows that individuals such as us and many of our listeners, at the first attempt of any harm befalling her or her ilk, we would be one of the first ones to step in and intervene and stop it. See, this is what individuals like Jin fear the most. They have their rhetoric, they have their propaganda, they have their alligator mouths running a mile a minute. And then the second that something would happen to them, it would be individuals like us that would stop it. They don't like that. They fear that because everything that they say with their alligator mouths would be completely undone, and they would have to, as our friend Nelson would say, grow a third leg so they would have something to stand on. They don't like that fact. They don't like the possibility of being completely undone in the terms of their agenda. They're embarrassed by it. They're embarrassed to even admit that they don't have the wherewithal or the inkling of care to even acknowledge something like that is possible, or even to do something themselves. What would Miss Jen do if one of her fellow protesters were to be accosted or put into peril during this demonstration that they're planning? Is she going to hammer down, put the balls to the wall, and make haste to intervene? I don't think so. I get the notion that she would probably either A, cower, or run away as fast as she could. Or maybe, who knows, pull out her rape whistle and her megaphone, her blowhorn, and blow it as loud as she can. Because, let's face it, folks, rape whistles are the most effective way to deter a hell-bent rapist or sexual deviant from attacking somebody. We all know that that works. It absolutely works, doesn't it?
It's about as effective as flashlighting and whistling somebody to death. Because that's literally what it is. It's not going to stop anybody from acting if they can clearly get an advantage over you. And that's the thing. There would be somebody on campus who would take risks, just as there was at Umpqua Community College. There was that veteran who was shot 7 times and he survived. Unfortunately, I can't think of his name at the moment, but he was attempting to save people. But he needn't have been wounded. If he had been able to carry, if there had been an armed guard, if there had been more people allowed to carry, they could have shot that deviant on the spot and saved a ton of people. And that is why we say that it's these gun-free zones that create the real danger and the real damage and the true harm and death. It is the radical left-wing agenda adopted by these universities throughout the country that put America in great danger. If you want to know why there's this epidemic occurring, and why copycat killers are going onto these campuses and doing these things, it is because they know that they are gun-free zones. These schools are proud of the fact that they are depriving their students of their unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, and thereby the very ability to keep themselves alive and safe. That is sickening, and parents and American students and all American citizens should be outraged about this radical clamping down on our free rights and abilities to defend ourselves. And, folks, this turns me to something that Bernie Sanders came out during a Boulder, Colorado event and called for a ban on all semi-automatic firearms. Bernie said, quote, "Instead of people yelling at each other, we have to come together on common sense approaches, which, in fact, the vast majority of the American people support." Close quote. He then went on to state that there is, quote, "widespread support to ban semi-automatic assault weapons, guns which have no other purpose but to kill." Close quote. Folks, that's malarkey. And Nerdface Sanders knows it. Those guns can be used for hunting, for target practice, for investment, and for self-defense. They can be used for entertainment out at the gun range, enjoying the ability to exercise your unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. Apparently, Bernie Sanders doesn't want Americans to continue to have the right of self-defense. Again, he wants to strip law-abiding citizens of their unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. I'm fed up with this nonsense. These people don't understand the Second Amendment at all, or worse, they do, but they don't care. I think it's more the latter than the former in the case of nerdface Bernie Sanders. Bernie, stop licking the windows. I think you've got lead poisoning. Otherwise, you wouldn't be drooling and salivating at the thought of depriving American citizens of their God-given rights. Bernie, why don't you crawl back into the hole that you crawled out from? Nobody wants you. Clearly. Nobody wants you. Nobody wants Hillary. Nobody wants the continuation of the deprivation of their liberties. And those that do, well, they're sycophants. And they are mindless tyrants that want to be thrust into the bondage of servitude. Not me. Not Jeremy. Not the listeners of this program. We've had it. We don't want your socialist drivel. We want the United States of America to remain a constitutional representative republic, as it was meant to be, as it was envisioned by our founding fathers. Stop attacking the good and decent people of this country. All these so-called assault weapon bans accomplish is making the American people less safe. Why do these politicians always seek to punish decent, law-abiding citizens? Well, it's because they know full well that these are the citizens who would defend their homes against any attempt by the government to encroach upon their fundamental liberties. As for his claim that a vast majority of Americans support these unlawful and unconstitutional gun grabs, I don't believe it. In fact, gun purchases are on the rise. More Americans are arming themselves because they fear that the government is going to deprive them of their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And who can blame them? Just look at the rhetoric that is being thrown out there by the likes of nerdface Bernie Sanders, President Obama, and even Hillary Clinton. They salivate over the Orwellian dream of depriving the citizens of their rights. Folks, it's also not a coincidence that they are making this push at the same time that they are attempting to punish law enforcement officers for carrying out their duties. This is all designed as an effort to overwhelm the system, thereby opening the door to even further erosions of the United States Constitution. We must say no. If we fail to, or if they succeed in their goals of stripping us of our unalienable rights, we will no longer be a free country. Without the Second Amendment, the people will not have the means with which to protect every other right contained within the Bill of Rights. We must also remember that George Mason had concluded, when he helped draft the Virginia Declaration of Rights, that we, the people, are endowed with certain unalienable rights which supersede any and all governmental authority. This is why Mason convinced James Madison to allow the inclusion of the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution, while idiots like Bernie Sanders and Jessica Ginn might try and misconstrue the Constitution as antiquated or outdated. What Mason has proven is that the natural law principles of the United States Constitution are timeless. People like Sanders understand this, and that is why they are attempting to tear the Constitution to shreds.
Well, it's people like Bernie Sanders, Jessica Ginn, Sarah Brady, Peters, I can't remember her first name. All of these individuals, it's the same rhetoric over and over and over. It's a broken record. Now, if there was a way to fix this broken record and possibly play it backwards, you know, I'm willing to bet we would see all of these anti-constitutional gun measures erased. Any and all pieces of legislation or ordinances, regulations, so on and so forth, that infringe meaning what? Infringe means to stand in the way of or to impede. No matter how minuscule or how grandiose that infringement might be, it is still an infringement nonetheless. Therefore, it is unconstitutional. Bernie Sanders wants to see nothing but the complete destruction of the Constitution. He's a socialist stemming from communism, so on and so forth. Take the entity known as the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. First of all, just that name, again, ought to invoke a reality check for people. Roger Nash Baldwin, one of the co-founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, was quoted as saying, "Our aim is to utilize the Constitution to destroy the Constitution." They want to take people's rights, twist the meanings around of them, and apply them in such a way with frivolous lawsuits to where the Constitution is put again under the microscope of the judiciary in order to be infringed upon through judicial review and legislation from the bench. It makes no difference if it's with the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 of the Constitution, or any part of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 being, no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed, which is exactly what Obamacare is. Thus, by passing a legislative act like that and having judicial review from the bench, by proxy it invokes the infringement upon other rights held in the Constitution, namely the Fifth Amendment, because you're being penalized with a tax. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but the point is this: when you utilize propaganda and you have entities like the ACLU or the Southern Poverty Law Center or the Muslim Brotherhood, the Black Panthers, the New Black Panthers, any of these outfits that want to stand up and pass off rhetoric as some kind of cogent, coherent thought. Again, folks, people need to listen to what's being said rather than just hearing the words. This is why, again, it is so important to have a working knowledge of what your rights are, what your Constitution exemplifies for you, what it entails and what it lays out and how it is applied. Without that, There is no ability to listen to the rhetoric and the propaganda and the venomous words being spoken. There's no willingness or ability to decipher right or wrong at that point. Because everything becomes, instead of absolute, it becomes emotional. And people like what they hear because it goes along with their feelings. Feelings are great things to have. Emotions are great things to have. But the ability to be able to curtail them and have a handle on them only comes, again, with the understanding of what those emotions are attached to and how those rights that you have under the Constitution of the United States are to be applied.
And you know, Jeremy, there's another aspect of why it's so important to have a working and fluent knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution. You know, there are people who sit there and say that the voters care just about things like the economy. Well, yes, the voters are going to react primarily to those things that hit them hardest first and foremost. And they're going to vote based on what would make them feel as though they're getting out of this current situation, which is completely untenable. But there's something greater to it. If you want proof that the radical left's agenda of tearing down the Constitution detrimentally impacts our economy, then do I have an example for you. According to Liz Klimas of the Associated Press, San Francisco's last remaining gun store is shuttering for good. The owner claims that they can no longer operate within the city's political climate of increased gun control regulations and vocal opposition to its business. What's poignant about the owner's, Steve Al-Cairo's, announcement of the closure is that it was posted on his Facebook page on September 11th. Folks, that is an ominous sign for us all. The acolytes of despotism and tyranny are starting to win. We have allowed them to poison the well, so to speak, and we must become proactive in the maintenance of our unalienable rights. These radical leftists have destroyed jobs in their community, all because of their radical political agenda. If President Obama is able to push through his executive actions to skirt around the Second Amendment, this decay in our jobs market will continue. They want to make it impossible for anyone in this country to own a firearm. They'll use any deceitful tactic to accomplish this goal too. Again, this is another reason why it is so important to know and understand your Constitution. It's designed to prevent this sort of madness from occurring. We all have the right to keep and bear arms, yet we also have the responsibility and duty to ensure that this right is never encroached upon. It's also proof positive that these Democrats who claim to care about the little guy couldn't care less about them. They are all for freedom, as long as it coincides with their radical agenda to fundamentally transform the United States. This is also why we cannot bow down to moderate or detente wings of the GOP. How can you compromise with a radical fringe movement that lies about what the people want and seeks to destroy decent citizens who are simply plying their vocation? They would deprive gun store owners of the ability to feed their families. They would deny you the right to defend your families, and they would deny us all the right to voice our opinion against them. This is scary stuff, folks, and the anti-gun movement is alive and well in this country. Jeremy and I have always said that the problems this country is currently facing are all symptoms of the government departing from the scope and application of the United States Constitution. Whenever we depart from the Constitution, our government becomes tyrannical, and the entire country suffers as a consequence. On the other hand, whenever we embrace and exercise our constitutional rights, the country improves, and our quality of life improves. If you want to see crime rates fall, and for the economy to improve, and for you to have the ability to earn more money, then you need to get the government out of your lives intruding in the way that it has been. And you should demand that the government return to the Constitution. Folks, it's really as simple as that.
You know, speaking of crime rates dropping, and I'm not sure how many of our listeners have actually heard about this, but the chief of police for the city of Detroit, I believe his name is James Craig, has been very vocal about his citizens, the residents there in his jurisdiction, owning firearms. He's very supportive of it. He wants his citizens to be safe. He has come out and said, and I'm paraphrasing, that criminals should take notice that the citizens and the residents of the city of Detroit and the Metro Detroit area are encouraged to arm themselves because they are the ones that are best effective of defending themselves. Now, he couldn't be any more wrong on this or right on this if he tried. Because the fact of the matter is, as the old saying goes, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. Individuals that want to decry police brutality and, anti-gun this and the police this, and they're always trying to jam us up. They're the first people, the first ones to call the police when they have an issue. Because they are reliant on law enforcement, because they perceive law enforcement to be proactive. That is not in the structure of law enforcement to be proactive. The proactiveness that must be attached in any situation is right there. It's instantaneous on the part of the individual that is being accosted. Law enforcement agencies are reactive. They show up after the fact. Crime has been committed. They show up, do their investigation, make any arrests that they can if it can be made, so on and so forth. That is where they come in with protect and serve. They protect the evidence. They protect the community by way of serving the community, by making sure that their rights are not further violated through the due process clauses of the Constitution and the state's constitutions, wherever they may be. It is the citizens' job to be proactive. It is the citizens' right and obligation to defend themselves. Here in Michigan, we have what people consider to be the Castle Doctrine. Michigan is a no-flee state. You do not have to flee in the face of imminent threats or danger. You have the right to stand your ground. You have the right to defend yourself. You do not have to flee. People want to attack those types of laws and that doctrine because they want to say, well, if it wasn't for this, then, my son or my daughter or brother, father, whoever it was that committed the crime, they want to label them as the victim. To try and undermine the whole integrity of individuals being able to protect themselves against would-be assailants. Since James Craig, Police Chief James Craig, has come out and made statements like this, crime rate in Detroit has dropped 12%, according to him. It's amazing, folks. It's amazing. People will say, well, 12% is not really that much. In the grand scheme of things, 12% carries much more weight than 12% more crime being committed. Anytime you can reduce the crime rate, even if it is 1/10 of 1%, it shows that whatever you're doing to diminish the crime rate is effective and it's working. Coming out and encouraging the residents of the city of Detroit and the metropolitan areas to arm themselves because they are the first line of defense of their liberties. Not the law enforcement agencies, not the government, not the politicians. The people are the first line of defense and the first proactive measure that needs to be taken. When we delineate from that and we detract from it and allow the people to not have the ability to do that, you will see crime rate increase. I guarantee you. Because the numbers do not lie. If you have more people that are unable, by way of legislation or regulatory incidents, to not be able to defend themselves, criminals, again, do not care about the law. That is why they are called criminals. They are void of having any remorse of the law whatsoever. They don't care about it. Therefore, because they don't care about the law, they don't care about the law-abiding citizens. Because the law that is in place and the law-abiding citizens, they go hand in hand. If you don't care about one, you surely don't care about the other. Furthermore, these criminals don't even care about themselves. In all honesty, they sure as hell don't respect themselves. Therefore, because they're void of respect of themselves, they're void of respect for the law and the law-abiding citizen. And the only way to stop that and prevent that from happening is for the citizens to be able to have carte blanche as far as being able to protect themselves in that instant. Without that, the victimhood of individuals will surely rise.
And that's exactly what these leftists, these extreme leftists, want to propagate onto the American people. They want to turn us all into victims, because then they believe that we will come crawling to the government and beg them to save us. And perhaps the weak-minded among us would. But I don't think that the listeners of this show would. I certainly don't think Jeremy would, and I know for a fact I wouldn't. In fact, I know for a fact Jeremy wouldn't. We understand that it is our duty, which coincides with our fundamental, unalienable right to keep and bear arms, to ensure that we defend ourselves. Because that is why we have self-defense. Like Michigan, the state of Texas is a stand your ground state. It is also a state with the castle doctrine. Why should you be forced to flee if your life is in danger? Why should you only have it meaning the right to self-defense, if you've exhausted all other options? Why do we want to give killers more chances of life than law-abiding citizens? That is the mixed-up mentality of the left, and that is why they push the propaganda that they do in order to try and strip us of every unalienable fundamental right we possess. These are the sort of people who would have fought for the British during the American Revolution. They would have sought to prevent the Constitution from ever being enacted or ratified or established as the supreme law of the land. Why? Because they loathe everyone else, because they have a self-hatred, because they are incapable of caring about themselves or caring for the American people or caring about anything that has value or matters. They hate everything and everyone, including themselves, as Jeremy had said. It is important that we be proactive in the maintenance of our rights. And what I mean when I say maintenance of our right, that means securing and preserving and advancing and utilizing our fundamental and unalienable rights at any and every opportunity that we can. And that's not a radical philosophy. That is just embracing what it is to be an American. You see, America has this can-do attitude that nothing can stop us, and we get it from the fact that we are endowed with these rights. It is the greatest national characteristic of the American people. But folks, it's fading, because these despotic, tyrannical potentates are chipping away at it every day, tirelessly attacking our ability to be free, our ability to be productive, our ability to defend ourselves. We should not bow down to the tenets of tyranny, to the tenets of despotism, because they will stop at nothing to deprive us of everything. And folks, once you lose your rights, you lose everything. Think about it. One of your unalienable fundamental rights is the right to life. When you capitulate and give the government everything, they can snuff out the right to life at any point with a snap of the finger. And that's exactly what they would do. And this is why people like Ms. Jin at the University of Texas are dangerous. She's an alum of the university. She has had her head filled with the utopian socialist nonsense that all these professors spew. And she will stop at nothing to deprive us of our fundamental unalienable rights. And that is why Jeremy and I take every available opportunity to share the message of the United States Constitution with you, to advance all of our knowledge in the United States Constitution, because it is that important to ensure that our rights are secure. And we can only do it by taking the first step. And the first step is understanding the Constitution. Get curious about it. Look it up. Read it. Embrace it. It is yours. It is mine. It is Jeremy's. It is all of ours as Americans. And, folks, when we embrace that aspect of it, when we fully realize that, we also come to the fundamental realization that because it is ours, and because it is based on natural law principles, nobody, except God Almighty, can take it away from us. With all that being said, we have come to the time where we must begin our descent. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and as always, my first officer has been Jeremy Grapington. We want to thank you for choosing to fly with us. We really couldn't do this without you. In fact, folks, we do all of this for you, and knowing that you're listening gives us the passion to keep pushing forward, because with your help and with the expansion of the knowledge of the Constitution, we can turn this country around. Thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and we hope to see you next time.